call the meeting to order at 3:03 on April the 14th. You were all Farah sent the minutes out. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes, or are there any corrections or additions?
I move for approval.
Okay. Mr. Hertz moved for approval. Second. By anyone? Mike's Withrow second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. Minutes are approved. We'll turn this over to Kimley Horn Group. And we all got the handouts that he's going to be talking from, John Adkins. So we all have those. So
okay.
Please proceed.
Okay. My understanding, Jeff, are you on? Whitaker?
I'm here. I'm on.
Okay. So, yes, I'm going to have Jeff present. Obviously, we listened to y'all's comments from the last meeting, made some updates to the graphs accordingly, and we're going to kind of do some short information that kind of leads up to the schedule, and then get fairly quickly into some of the comparative chart updates that you all requested. And be a lot of open discussion today with all parties involved. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Jeff and let him take it from here.
Sure thing, John. Thank you. Just a reminder where we're at in the process. For those who didn't see last night, we presented the land usage assumptions and capital improvements plan that y'all had recommended for adoption by council, and they moved to approve the assumptions, the planning step, last night. So we have the land use assumptions and impact fee capital improvements plan that was approved by council last night. We finished the analysis step. We're somewhere in between finishing the analysis and working on the policy step, talking about fees with this group. So we're starting to talk about the fees today, and then moving towards adoption. The schedule that I'm having, for some reason my screen's not moving forward. There we go. The schedule that we discussed with CIAC, we've met with you 5 times to date. This is our 6th meeting. And today it was to discuss and formulate written recommendations on impact fees. Doesn't mean we have to stop today, and we highly feel like we're going to have a few more meetings with you guys as we work through this process. We're trying to work through the fee discussion in the month of April and May so that we can have something to present to council in the June timeframe. So, but we have some time. So this is the first meeting, and we'll have to discuss at the end of this meeting what our next steps are. But this, as our current schedule that was written, these were the dates that we had planned for, knowing that we might have more. So we'll have that discussion in a little bit. Any questions from the group on where we've been, our previous meetings, before I dive into some of the fee discussion? Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the fee discussion. You might remember these tables that we sent for SOAR. We were trying to summarize the results of our study as simply as possible. We talked a lot about using the 1-inch meter to be a comparison with Midland. So this is the City of Odessa's maximum accessible impact fees per service unit. This is actually what the study resulted in. $1,297 for water, $2,770 for wastewater, and then the 3 roadway service areas between $1,240 and $2,726. This is just the, if you will, the executive summary of the study. We then, I don't know why my thing's delayed. I'm trying to figure that out. We then, really what we're trying to do to get a recommendation, if you will, is we're trying to fill in that table. The previous chart that I showed you was the caps. We have to decide where between 0 and that cap we're going to fill in the table. So this is blank. At the end of the day, when we have a recommendation from CIAC, it will generally fill in this table. One of the things that was discussed at the last meeting was, how did this look in Midland? So this was Midland's table when they finished their study. Their water was 3312, wastewater 1677, and then their roadway between 1400 and 2052. They have 4 service areas in Midland. Odessa has 3 on the roadway side, so a little bit different there. But when they adopted their fees, what they adopted in Midland was 50% of the maximum fees, and then they reduced residential at 25%. So this was actually, if you will, the table that they adopted in their ordinance.
Jeff, explain, help us make sure we all understand the residential reduction at 25%.
Sure.
What does that cover? And just fill that blank in for us a little bit more, please, sir.
Great question, John. So what it covers was single family townhomes and duplexes. So it wasn't necessarily residential. It was single family townhome duplexes only. And there was a reduction of 25%. So when they took the maximum fee, so what you see in the table above you with tables all these numbers, if it was single family townhome or duplex, this number was reduced 25% for those three categories.
Thank you.
In other words, 75%?
Yes, 75% of the number that you see in front of you here. Yes, correct.
Is what when you got a permit, you would pay that amount to the city at the time of permitting. And if it's for residential, single family, duplex or townhouse, it'd be 75% of the numbers that are on the screen.
And that was a phased in approach. I have to look back at Midland's ordinance. I believe that they're applying that 25% discount, if you will, for the first 3 years of the program. I'll have to verify that, but it's not through the entire program.
Okay.
But they wanted to.
And council has that discretion, or we have that discretion in our recommendation, is what you're saying, that it could be phased in 25%, 30%. It could be any number that we wanted that we could recommend or that council could adopt. And council does not have to accept our recommendations either, right?
Nope. And generally at minimum, you just have to provide comments to council on the fee. So some committees decide to say, we like impact fees and we think that this should be this, or we don't like impact fees, we think that them should be this. That's the minimum. What most cities try to do is at least fill in this table for the council, this yellow table, say, hey, here's what we think the fee should be. And then they might have asterisks like Midland, hey, we want to make residential reduce at 25% for single family townhomes and duplexes. So I think the floor is kind of open. It's open for you to ask questions for myself, John, and city staff, and we can try to answer those questions of what other cities have done. But pretty common to have a base rate adopted and then maybe a reduction or two based on the goals and objectives of the committee or the council at that time.
I mean, you could say workforce housing could be, and you'd have to define that. And I guess I may be running down too many rabbit trails here, but there are a lot of, when we get to that point, there are a lot of things that we could discuss as separate ways to go, right?
There are, you're right. Yep.
Okay.
There are a lot of things that we could discuss. So we go workforce housing gets complicated. It's the definition of that, et cetera. One thing, affordable housing has some, I call it capital A affordable housing. Federal affordable housing has some state statute already associated with it. So you don't have to necessarily worry about the capital A affordable housing from the federal programs.
Okay. All right. So, fine. Thank you. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Nope.
I'm sorry, Jeff, before you go on, did the city of Midland make any of those provisions, as John mentioned, or distinctions rather, for either affordable or workforce housing? They just lump it all in?
No, it was all single family townhomes and duplexes at 25%
no matter
reduction.
what.
No matter what.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So going on, we there was some discussion about comparison charts. Actually, before I go on, any other questions on what Midland kind of adopted and what Odessa's maximum fees are before we kind of jump into the comparison chart?
Hey, Chris, let me introduce you, or introduce yourself to our committee. I think this is your first time, and you said at council last night you would be here, and you have quite a bit of experience on impact fees from your getting around the state of Texas. So tell our committee about yourself a little bit like you did last night, please, sir.
Yes, sir. Thanks, John. I appreciate all the work that you've done. I've been following you up for the past couple of weeks, reading up all the minutes. My name's Chris Berry. I'm with Beaton Bow Homes. I know Mr. Whitaker a little bit. Been involved in the Midland impact fee on the time. Most of my experience has come on the Lubbock impact fee. I served on the Comprehensive Planning Advisory Committee. Did a lot of work with the Lubbock SEAC Committee. Was involved in a lot of their meetings and stakeholder meetings, and kind of integrated with city staff along that impact fee journey quite a bit, and got into a lot of details, and just wanted to kind of hop back in the Odessa impact fee and see if I could be a benefit as a stakeholder in this meeting and just kind of along the way.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we'll talk more about the stakeholders towards the end of this meeting too. I think we had some discussion about that at council last night.
Sure.
Okay, Jeff, sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks for introducing Chris. So this is the maximum fees. This is the results of the study. As you can see, when you compare Midland and Odessa's results of the study, the total is very similar. When you look at it, the different categories, like water had a little bit higher need in Midland than maybe in Odessa, and the wastewater was vice versa. So when you look at the actual results of the study, you kind of see some comparisons. But the overall result, now remember, this is the maximum impact fee comparison. So this is what your cap is going to be. So what we did, and one of the requests of the committee last time was to show each service area broken down by each three, so you can clearly see blue being water, green being wastewater, red, orange being roadway, and you can see the 4 areas in Midland. So we took that philosophy and showed it what it would be at Midland's adopted at 50%. 50%. So this chart compares 50% of Odessa's calculated maximum fees to Midland's adopted fees. So if you look at the 50% number for Midland, this is if you took the results of our current draft study and adopted 50%, and you took Midland to what they actually adopted, and this is the comparison between the two. So water, because water's one service area, would be 648 compared to 838. Wastewater would be 1385 compared to 1656. And then roadway, this is per service unit, would range between 620 to 1363, and in Midland it's 781 to 1017. So you see a lot of similarities between the two when you do it. There's just some of the different elements are separate a little bit. One of the things I wanted to point out to this group is, that's taking 50%. Your wastewater need is 2770. So, but when you cut it in half, it does become lower. So you can move those needles as you want to move, but this is applying the 50% logic that Midland applied. We took that a step farther and compared it to a house. So this was a comparison from Odessa Midland for a single family detached house with the 1-inch meter. Remembering that it's 50% the maximum and there's a 25% housing credit. So if you look at Midland, this is actually if you would go pull your building permit, water and wastewater meter is what you would pay in the various service areas. You apply the exact same logic to Odessa, that Midland's advisory committee, this is what the fee would be. So this is basically saying, if you took Odessa's study and used Midland's ordinance, basically, this is kind of what you would come out with, just for comparison purposes. So between on the water side in Odessa, $486. On the wastewater side, $1,039, and then roadway $1,381, which that's in that downtown developed area, so less improvements in there, to $2,430.36, and then comparison to Midland's various areas. Like I mentioned earlier, this is just taking Midland's logic. There's numerous different logics that you could use to develop a fee recommendation, but the request was to compare the logic. If Odessa was to take Midland's logic, what would that look like? So with that, I'm going to take some questions on, we've compared the maximum fee, we compared the 50% fee, and we compared the housing fee, the single family housing fee. We have other examples of other developments beyond that after this, but want to stop at the housings. That's where we get most of the questions, and kind of walk through thoughts behind what you're seeing on the single family housing and the comparison between Midland and Odessa to see kind of where the committee's thoughts and questions are coming at this point. And I'll flip back to the single family house if that helps you to kind of see what that looks like.
Jeff, do we know what the average is for, given this 50% with the 25%, what the average is in both cities?
The average. Oh,
Yeah, so aggregate the 3 Odessa and the 4 Midland, and what does that come out to? Do we know what that figure is?
I know Odessa's is 37.97. I just calculated that on the fly here. And Midlands would be 38.35.
Thank you.
Say those again, please.
Midlands is $3,835 for water, wastewater, and roadway, on average through the 4 areas. And Odessa's, based on the calculated study, would be $37.97. So Odessa's a little bit less.
$38. Yeah.
Yep.
1%. Any other questions for Jeff before he moves to the next discussion item?
Jeff, let me ask you a question. This goats. The numbers I'm looking at, I've been driving in my car, so now I'm finally getting to see the numbers. What I'm looking at on what you have up, so if we were in District 2 of Odessa to build a single family home, they would need, the impact fee is $29.06,
That's correct. The total impact fee, yes.
and that would be with the 50% of maximum and the 25% housing credit.
That's correct.
And in District 1, it's $45.61.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Landgraf, I think you and I have talked about it before, but I see no way that Odessa can be higher in our impact fee than Midland and still compete for homes. Do you agree?
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think Midland is our competition. I'll let Mr. Berry chime in. He builds in both markets. I mean, we're obviously very competitive in what we do, right, Chris? I mean, between Midland and Odessa, y'all see that every day, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for us personally, you know, we have a little bit bigger of a team in Odessa, so we're actually building more. We're trying to start and close 9 to 10 homes a week in Odessa. So, you know, I think that kind of speaks for itself right now. With the industry the way it is, and from last year, you know, there's still a lot of recovery. Lumber prices are going up. I know everything seems to be going up. And then the talk of adding impact fees makes for a really difficult discussion. So I know there's a lot of opinions. If you're going to ask me personally, I think this is at least a good start, looking at a 25% housing credit.
Chris, let me ask you a question. Is the impact fee have anything to do with you starting more units in Odessa than you do Midland, or is it just a difference in the market, or what would you attribute more starts in Odessa to?
The cost of building homes was a little bit lower in Odessa. So the customers were kind of going towards that, especially the past couple of years. You know, we saw people originally signed up for 2,000 and up homes, and a lot of those kind of repurposed their directions and went to the little smaller homes. And if we have to go add $5,000 or $4,500 to each permit, you know, at that point, that would kind of and I'm speaking from a crystal ball point of view. You know, I think that would hamper the market in Odessa quite a bit. There's still a little gap. This impact fee doesn't close that full gap of being more affordable than Midland, but the clientele in Midland, you know, it's a little bit, or the clientele in Odessa is a little bit different than Midland. A lot of our people aren't going to be able to afford the same house in Midland and than they would in Odessa because it's just a more affordable place. It's a place that people desire. So adding $4,500 would kind of be hard. And I know Jeff may get into this a little bit, and the SEAC may kind of get into this a little bit. What we've seen is there's opportunities to build infrastructure and apply those credits. So we actually we've only been paying the sewer charge in Midland, and I think that's $380. So we're still a couple of years out from paying anything else because of some of the projects we were able to apply the credits in Midland and in Lubbock because of when their effective date was. And I can get into those details later, but we really haven't paid an impact fee, so to speak, other than $380.
Can I ask a clarification, Chris? When you pull a water meter in Midland, is it a 1-inch meter? Is that the size you're pulling?
Oh man, you asked me a question I should know, but I can't remember if it's 3/4 or 1 inch.
I just want to point out, you know, we're comparing 1-inch meters here, so if someone might hear a different number, you might be pulling a 3/4-inch meter. I'm not sure. So,
Yeah,
but
good point.
that would be a little bit cheaper if you pull a different size meter on the single family home. But that is a good point that Chris brought up. Is one of the things on impact fees, especially on the roadway or maybe even some of the regional water infrastructure, is if a developer needs to build the infrastructure like a thoroughfare or a capital improvement project to get to the road, they will receive the offsets. They won't pay the fee and build the roadway. The system roadway, the roads that are like thoroughfares to build their development. So if they're building those roadways, credits are due. And that, I guess, is what you're experiencing in Midland right now, is that you build some roadway infrastructure, so you're not having to pay your roadway impact fee.
Yeah.
Tom Kerr, oh, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask Tom Kerr. Tom, how would if we do an impact fee for roadways, how does that affect the over width pavement that our developers get paid in Odessa if they, you know, that they're responsible for residential for essentially, you know, 20 feet of pavement and curb and gutter on each side of the road, and then the city pays the over width cost. But if we had the impact fee, would that negate the over width reimbursements?
And Jeff may have more experience in applying it, obviously, than I do. But that would be my understanding. So the over width portion that was constructed could be applied as a credit to the fees, so that the fees would no longer be due.
Right. Okay. I mean,
Chris,
That's typical. Go ahead, Michael.
Chris, this is Michael in Odessa. So I want to go back to the distinction that you made between the homes you build in Midland versus the homes you built in Odessa. So in terms of you say you build slightly more in Odessa. I mean, if you had to quantify that, what does that mean? Is it 100 more in Odessa, 20 more? Is it 5 more?
So we have 6 starts a week in Midland right now, and we're at 9 starts a week in Odessa. We have 2 full builder teams in Odessa.
Okay. And in terms of the actual developments, that cost that you said is higher in Midland as compared to Odessa, when you're comparing, let's say, apples to apples, are we talking about the same sort of development? Because I obviously go out to Midland and I've looked at your developments there. They're somewhat a little different than they are here. So are we really comparing apples to apples, and does that impact the cost?
You know, that's a good statement, Michael. In the development world, it's really hard to find apples to apples because each one has the streets, the infrastructure, the water, sewer, everything's just a little bit different. So your costs are always just a little bit different.
Yes, sir.
So it's really hard to get an apples to apples.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, this is Mike Withrow. in Odessa, correct me, most of your development would be in our #1 area. In Midland, would you kind of let us all know? I think I know, but I want everyone else to know what areas you'd be in Midland.
Yeah, and I don't have my chart pulled up in Midland. Remember the service area. I don't know if they do letters, but it's right off 349 in the north portion, kind of fairgrounds. B. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be in B.
Yes, sir.
Are you still in C at all, or no? Are y'all finished there?
No, we're finished there over in Legends.
Okay. So you're just in the B area. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, go back to the comparison chart then. All right, B. So you're adding 3610 to each one of your building permits then.
Compared to 4,500 over here.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, John, this is John Atkins. Just as a bit of information, in Midland, the base meter in their impact fee table is a 1 inch. Therefore, I would assume when a builder comes in that's doing single family, if nobody said anything, then that's probably the 1 inch meter is what gets issued for the home. Just to clarify.
Right.
That's true, because that's why we did this.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
And Chris may actually be doing a 3/4 inch, and he may do a 3/4 inch in Odessa, but we wanted just to, so we could try to compare as close to apples and apples. We're just going to talk about 1 inch now. We'll make those adjustments. Yeah, based on something. Mike, to give us all kind of your perspective, because you and I visited a little bit about what these numbers would do for closings in Odessa. I mean, as far as, because it really gets rolled into the 30-year mortgage, right? So you're not really paying $4,500 or $3,600. You're paying quite a bit more when it's.
That's correct. I mean, they're going to, of course, the builder's going to need to pass this on, and with the additional cost. And like Chris said, I know that builders are all talking about the cost of lumber and cost of all goods and supplies, that's really affecting their overall cost of their homes. And so, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, this would basically be on an average around $3 a foot additional on one of your houses, correct? 1,500 square foot.
I'd probably defer that back to you. You probably know a little bit better on the tail end of it than where I'm at.
So, but I mean, then you're going to have a situation where the borrower is going to be, you're going to have an increase in your sales price, I'm sure, to cover that. And then you're going to have a borrower that's probably going to have to then borrow another 80% of that $4,500, we can say, or maybe 85% of that $4,500. So, and you know, I think that sometimes that can make a difference in someone qualifying and not in certain areas of town.
Okay, good information from Chris, Mike. I appreciate it. Any more questions before we move on?
This is Philly. I don't know. I mean, y'all probably covered this last month when you had a meeting, but why is it 336 for roadway in Odessa, and equivalent to Odessa would be B in Midland, which is only 1740 for roadway? Can somebody explain that to me?
Their bond election that they did.
Right.
Yeah, Jeff can tell you, and Jimmy and I can hit it real quickly. Midland had a $100 million bond issue that the voters voted on for roadway improvements a few years ago, 3 to 5 years ago. I don't remember exactly when. And so they've got quite a bit of capital money that's being put into their roadway system that they're not going to have to do in the future, because they're doing it now based on that $100 million bond that they had.
And then the homeowner will be paying that in extra tax over the next 100 years.
100. Okay.
Well, not 100. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I understand. I appreciate that. Okay, that makes a little bit more sense now.
Didn't they do a bond for the sewer plant too?
No, the sewer
Yeah.
plant is being funded with their Pioneer money, their expansion of their or actual complete reconstruction of their wastewater plant.
Okay.
And that's probably another reason that wastewater numbers almost half.
Right, because that's a big addition over there. I've been out there too. Okay.
Yeah, there's so many variables that go into it as well. Cost growth goes into it too as well. Some of the sectors in Midland are going really fast. If you recall our growth, we had 4%. Some of them might have been a little higher in Midland. So there's a lot of different factors, but I think y'all covered some of the important factors as well. That really kind of dictated. These numbers are based on those capital improvement plan and land use assumptions that was adopted last night, and very specific to each service area, if you will.
Is there a way to find out how much more taxes they're paying per household per year, and would it equivalent to the 3036 for us versus the 1740 for them? I don't know if that makes sense or not. In other words, I understand with that bond, they're going to have to, the people in the city of Midland has to pay taxes. And I know he said joking around for 100 years, but how much more they're having to pay taxes to pay that bond back versus adding
Michael
it to.
knows. Michael knows tax rate in Midland versus tax rate in Odessa.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, obviously when you look at these numbers, and if we're comparing area 1 to area B in Midland, I mean, it's obvious just by looking at that the reason that number is lower in Midland is because they've already got pre-existing road work, and ours is still in need of that. And I think it might be worth looking at, and I can certainly touch base with the city manager over in Midland, and maybe you can give me a list of all the roads that were done, because I for some reason, Jimmy and John, I'm thinking that, and Mike, that bond money was for a good component of it was for reconstruction work and not so much new development work.
Yes, it was for a lot of it was for rehab.
Yeah.
But quite a bit of it, and I just remember Fairgrounds Road is an example. Fairgrounds Road's 2-lane, falling apart, nothing roadway, and it's a major thoroughfare now, and they've widened it to 5 lanes, and so that would definitely qualify, adding the capacity that they added. So there is a lot of, even though some of it is classified as reconstruction, they're expanding quite a few of those roadways as part of that $100 million. So I don't think it's all just, repaving Wadley and things like that. There are a lot of capital improvements associated with it.
John, if I remember right, it was about 60% rehab, 40% new, or what you and I would consider new, like expanding Fairway from 2 to 5 lanes, that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay.
But that's just my memory.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the reason why all this is not you can't look at it totally apples to apples, because it's just not. But if we're higher on our impact fees than Midland, then the Chris Berrys of this world are going to start building more houses in Midland, and I just know that's going to happen. So what we need to do, John, in my mind, is to come up with a figure that if we're going to do impact fees, that we can live with as a group, that we then take to the city council, or tell them that we don't agree with impact fees, because we can't be higher than Midland in any sector, I don't believe.
I understand. I think that's Philly. What's your impression on that? And Joe and the rest of you, Richard?
I think we're gonna need some impact fees, but I don't wanna be higher than Midland, that's for sure.
No, I don't think we can be any higher than Midland either. I agree with Dr. Goetz.
Would it work if we went from 4561 in area 1 to match the 4156 in Midland, but in area 2 do the 2906 and bring it up to 3441 to, I guess, level it out a little bit?
What
I'm
one of the
sorry,
things?
to me, that makes no sense.
Well,
I'm sorry?
Mike, what were you gonna say?
well, I still think you got to look at your demographic areas as to, are you going to impact Odessa number 2 and make it harder for someone in that area to acquire a property because you've raised that, and I think that's something we all need to look at as far as the demographics and see kind of what the tolerance levels would be in various areas.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
why I
look at
said
it
it
for
didn't make
people
sense. I agree,
qualifying for
Mike.
homes and builders being able to build the homes. And I mean, I'd be more apt to say we lower it all the way across the board. Somehow it comes up with maybe a little happier medium and be below Midland because, like I said in the past meeting, I know we're losing people to Midland right now, and I don't like that at all, and I don't think any of us do. But we don't want to give them another reason to go that direction.
Yeah, I agree, Mike, and the numbers that you're looking at, Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but those are numbers that are just kind of out there. We don't have to go by those numbers. We just can't go above those numbers. So we can come up with our own numbers.
Well, these are 50. Yeah, here's the real numbers. The maximum is what we can't go above.
Right.
The other ones were 50% and using
Yeah.
Midland's, right, using Midland's ordinance, like Jeff said. And what our numbers would be if we just adopted Midland's ordinance, these would be our numbers that are shown on the screen for Odessa. So, we obviously don't have to adopt Midland's ordinance. We can recommend whatever we want it to be, and we can just recommend flat numbers too. And then, I mean, they can just be a number, right, Jeff? I mean, we can say we want ours to be $3,000 across the board, or something to that effect, and then proportion it out to the paving, water, and sewer.
The best example I have that it's not the best comparison example, but the similar conversation is in the city of College Station. We had a similar conversation of Bryan versus College Station, if you will. One has impact fees and one doesn't, and their decision was what John just suggested. They adopted 5,000 a house, and they broke that down. 35. They had a huge need for wastewater, so it's 3,500 for wastewater, 1,500 for roadway, and 500 for water. That's how their CIAC's recommendation to council was. So you can have flexibility to determine that recommendation. We were just trying to provide you what was shown last time as, hey, if the Midlands ordinance is, this is what Odessa would come out to. But this is just half. You can change those numbers and come up with that recommendation in what form or fashion you choose to.
Right. Okay. Good.
John, in Philly, Odessa number 2 is an area that we're going to try to build more affordable homes. You definitely don't want a higher impact fee in that area.
Well,
Right.
and the other thing you're going to have on that particular, and a lot of these areas for a while, you're going to have issues with the appraisals, and especially in the areas where we're trying to, like in number 2, because $2,900 additional appraisal is going to maybe make it, one, a little less affordable, and 2, it may make it harder for them to even get the home to be appraised, and it may not be as able to build in that area as easily. And that's what we want to get to. So I'm kind of more for, again, looking at it and seeing if we can compromise maybe in all 3 areas and go from there.
Mike, does the impact fee, since it becomes a part of the cost of building, does that raise the value of every home in Odessa by $3,000? I mean, just assuming it's a $3,000.
John, I don't think it will instantaneously, and Chris can probably discuss the lumber situation. It's kind of like when the lumber's gone up. Like the lumber's gone up like 3.5 times what it was maybe a year ago. So I think the impact fees would be a similar situation. You kind of have to let it grow into the market and let it establish itself. But in certain areas where you don't have a lot of what the appraisers call comps, that makes it more difficult. Say you've got 9 houses a week being built in Odessa number 1. Well, they can absorb that quicker because their appraisals are going to come online quicker. But in Odessa number 2, you may have 10 houses built in a year.
Gotcha.
And so those comps aren't there to absorb it as quickly. And just because of availability of particular lots and land right there, all the expansion's probably in 2 and 3 right now. And so I think that's something we need to consider also.
Hey, Philly, I looked up a Midland Reporter article on the bond election. On a $250,000 house, according to the Midland Reporter, raised the taxes $100 a year.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you. Thank you, Richard.
For a $250,000 house.
This is the perfect discussion that we're hoping to have with the group. So y'all are on the right track and asking the questions. So I think starting to come up with ideas of what this looks like in Odessa is where we're trying to head to.
Yeah, and I want to remind the committee that impact fees are just another way to help fund the growth in the city. You know, we've been funding the growth in the city through multiple ways that we've talked about at some of our other meetings. And I just want to remind everybody, I'm not trying to negate impact fees by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, we still have some of the other mechanisms and ways to do things. We're just trying to help create some more flexible ways to fund capital improvements, because we've got literally, if we're going to grow, and I think we need to talk about that little aspect, the elephant in the room here in a minute. But if we're going to continue to grow as a community, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of needs in the next 10 years, as we've proven to ourselves by these master plans and the capital improvements that are required to satisfy our master plan. So I think we've, you know, we need to help figure out ways to fund those things, and this impact fee is just adding some more flexibility to the city government to be able to fund those capital needs.
Hey, John, if you take that, and I'm not trying to knock this down or anything, but if you take the $4,500 that would increase on that one area, and I use that as a round number, and say it's at 3.25%, that's additional $19.58 a month to someone's payment, which would truly be more, because Chris, most of y'all's homes out in that area are around 250,000, correct? Is he still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. It's a little bit lower, I think around 180 or 200.
Okay, so I may be, but anyway, on the 250 where it raised the taxes by $100 a year, this would be, by that additional impact fee over 30 years, would roughly, if you did the full 4,500 at 3.25% interest, is going to be $19 a month. So at that point in time, you're looking at, you know, $240 a year, $7,000 over the term of the loan if you don't pay it off early. So I don't know if that's relative or not, but it seems like what John said, there may be other options out there too that we could explore too. It might be more beneficial to a lot of people.
How many other builders besides Chris are going to be getting credits? And I'm not sure I understand the credit situation, but that's because you've already put the roads in, I presume, over in the other areas. So do we have that circumstance over in Odessa, Chris, where you'd be getting a credit for different things?
That really depends on the infrastructure. The one that we have over in Midland, we're working to deal out with the city on fairgrounds, so we extended fairgrounds almost 2 miles. And that was about the same time that impact fees got implemented. So really, we just got lucky that was able to be used as a credit. So it's kind of circumstantial. And in Midland, I would imagine things like Evans or 100th Street, you know, if we wanted to improve those are type areas, or extend line H, something like that, that we would be able to apply for credits.
Yep. Dr. Goetz, the answer to that is yes. I think Chris just hit on a couple of things that would have qualified that he's had to do here in Odessa. I know D.R. Horton's done some major roadway and sewer line and water line extensions that show up on, and is getting ready to do some that show up on the plan, the long range plan. And there's same thing that Desert Ridge is doing, that Larry Lee's doing. So yes, I think there are several things that developers would get credits for. The big developers, you know, guy that builds 10 houses a year or something and just buys lots, probably not so much.
Hey, John, what you said is the guy that buys lots, like on Desert Ridge. Of course, we got Larry is the developer of that, and then you've got different builders in that particular area. So therefore, they would they be able to get credit for what Larry's done, or is that going to be that, boom, they're going to be paying this impact fee based on the area they're in?
I don't know how that's structured. I think that's an excellent question, Mike, because I think they passed that savings on to the impact fee at the time of the permit, right, Jeff?
Yeah, that's a great question. We usually address that in the ordinance. The person, typically it will go to the building permit person. There are some cities that choose to collect the impact fee and reimburse. What we'll put in the ordinance likely is that a credit agreement has to be, you know, administratively done or potentially councilly done between the developer and the city, and that defines how that credit's going to be outlined. In most cases, it goes back to the builder, and so like that way it doesn't necessarily affect the price of the land, if you will.
And in your case with Beaton Bow and DR, they're developer and the builder.
Right, but we have developers that don't build houses, that just sell lots.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
And they would have to work out those development agreements at the time of the impact fees are assessed, right, Jeff?
Yeah, it just has to, agreement would have to be in place before the building permit's pulled. It doesn't have to necessarily be when they're assessed, but it just depends on when you accept the roadway infrastructure. Typically, the agreement's done when the roadway infrastructure is accepted.
Okay.
Or the wastewater water infrastructure.
Does the city still require developers like to do city parks, those kind of inside their developments?
Jimmy, no, we don't require that. We've had a couple of discussions in the past about a parkland dedication, but city councils have been reluctant to implement that sort of requirement.
Okay.
Our average sales price is $223 in Odessa.
And I don't think parks are eligible for impact fee structures, are they, Jeff?
Sorry, can you say that again?
No.
Parks aren't eligible for impact fee structures,
No.
are they? Under state law.
No, some cities have a park development fee, but that's not an impact fee.
Right, I knew that. I was just asking because it's another money on top of another money.
Well, yeah, because you'll have developers that are saying they're having to put parks in. I just hear it because what I do, and they'll say, well, that lowers the net acreage I've got for development, therefore it causes the cost of lots to be higher, and then here we gotta go. So that's why I think the city's kind of tabled that at this point in time.
So one of the questions that was brought up was about single family and how often does it happen to credits? And as Chris mentioned, they may have looked into it in the fairgrounds example. But what we see across the different cities we worked in is that typically single family is out first before the commercial comes. So a lot of the single family developers are either waiting on the city to build the infrastructure to get there, or they build it themselves. So most of the credit agreements that we deal with are related to single family. There are others that are on commercial that are building out there first, but we see single family building more water, wastewater extensions, and thoroughfare roadways than probably any other type of development. So your most common credit seen typically is on the single family housing because they're getting out first.
Right. Yeah, you got to have the rooftops to justify the
Yep.
commercial at retail. Okay, Jeff, you want to take us to the next steps,
Sure.
and then we'll continue. I'm not cutting anybody off. Anybody's got any other questions, certainly.
So one of the things that we wanted to show you, and we'll run through these relatively quick because it's a lot of the same thing, but single family ends up getting most of the conversation. But when you get to other types of developments, especially on the transportation side, single family has an impact, but there's a lot of single family units as compared to less number of multifamily or commercial developments. So when you look at the graphs and compare Midland to Odessa at the 50% calculated rates, this is for a 250 unit multifamily mid-rise, assuming that a 1.5 inch meter serves it. So you can see most of the impact fee for that 250 units is for the transportation side. And there's, the small.
Yep, the slide hadn't changed on our end.
Yeah, we're not
Oh,
on a new slide.
sorry about that. Here's the 250 unit multifamily. As you can see, served by 1.5 inch meters, you can see the meter, the water and wastewater infrastructure required to serve doesn't necessarily increase as exponentially as the roadway. The roadway is basically each unit serves at roughly 2/3 of a single family house. So it's less than a single family house at 250, but this would be the entire one. And the way that those would work would be very similar to single family when you pull a building permit. So they wouldn't pull all the 250 units at once. Each building probably has 12, 16 units in it, and they would pay 12 or 16 units on each building permit. But this would be the total all-inclusive dollar amount. And so sometimes folks always ask me, I was working on about a 250 unit apartment complex, and they wanted a signal at their thoroughfare to help their residents get out. And a signal was roughly, I think that signal was roughly $350,000. And so in that case, that signal in that community, they received credit towards the signal, which would be about the credit in like Odessa 3. So they built that signal for the city, but they received the credits towards it. So that's just a real life example of how credit works, maybe in a multifamily situation that happened. What sometimes impact fees do is that, some of the developments that may have some infrastructure once that they're not required to do, they sometimes build them so that their development benefits from it. And then in some cases, developers can build things a little cheaper than the city can. So it's kind of somewhat becomes a win-win situation for both the city and the developer, saving a little bit on their impact fees, and the city gets the infrastructure in place. Here's an example of a general office, 5,000 square feet. Same comparisons you've seen before. What you'll notice here is the water and wastewater doesn't move too much. And that's when, if you know about water and wastewater master planning, it's a lot about population and rooftops. That drives a lot of the decisions in water and wastewater. And roadway, we're a lot about 50-50 roadway and infrastructures and non-residential. I think most of you drive around. A lot of the complaints are in commercial areas as much as residential areas. So this is just an example of the 5,000 comparing, and I think you all have copies of these slides as well. Here's the light industrial. I'll note that one of the most popular industrials in today's market has been the warehouse, and this is all based on trips generated. So this is the light industrial. This is kind of like your manufacturing light industrial rate. If it was a warehouse, it would be much less than this because warehouse doesn't generate as much trips. So there's a category for warehouse as well. Just letting you know that there's multiple different land uses, and the objective is to get as close to the trip generation. And the last example was a typical shopping center.
The difference in light industrial and warehouse might require a zoning ordinance change because you can do warehouses in light industrial.
That,
I'm sorry, we don't need to run down that rabbit trail. We
No.
just talking comparisons right now.
the great thing about impact fees, one of the positive things is to steal up building permit. So if you're pulling it for a warehouse, you can pay on a warehouse even if it's potentially
Okay.
the zone is light industrial. So, and we could talk a little bit about if you change use later, how does that look and how does that work in the ordinance? But it's all pulled up building permit. It's not necessarily dependent on zoning. So,
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you.
And then last slide we have, and then we can talk about next steps and open discussion. One of the things we're talking about is what is the revenue projected generation. So I'm gonna walk these through you real quick. Is the first line shows about $4 million if the annualized max fee at 50% in the residential credit. So this is our projection if you adopt the Midlands ordinance, for lack of better words. This is the projection if you remove the residential credit. So that residential credit, if you will, cost or generates about $500,000 less in revenue. The investment in the residential section is about $500,000 a year. If you look at the max fee, it's $9 million. It's about double. If you looked at the annualized capital cost need, the total cost of the projects needed in Odessa, as Michael mentioned earlier, I think someone mentioned, this is just one of the tools and the funding source. So if you did adopt the maximum, you'd be collecting $9 million out of that $35 million overall need that the city of Odessa needs to generate through either utility revenues, bond, general fund, other sources of funding. So this is just to give you kind of what is the impact of us collecting impact fees on our total need, just to give you some perspective of what that would look like. And that was our presentation. Really the next steps, I think the two next steps were really understanding, and I think, John, you're going to hit this, of how we're going to reach out to the development community to answer their questions, get some feedback, and then also the next steps for us to work towards formalizing the final recommendation from this committee. This was kind of the, I guess, the kickoff of like really diving into the numbers, give you a lot of stuff to chew on, and then really figure out the next steps and next meetings. And I think those are potentially a developer workshop with CIC, and then a really meeting to wrap up the recommendation. So John, I'll turn it over to you to kind of talk about next steps, but that's what we kind of see as next steps.
Jeff, thank you very much. I think that's a tremendous amount of information. I certainly answered an awful lot of questions, and I think there's been some real good dialogue. I think now we need to have some dialogue amongst ourselves. At the council meeting, I had been asked prior to that meeting, and then reiterated again, several of you have told me you thought we need to have the stakeholders intimately involved in some discussion before they start seeing this thing. They're already hearing about the discussions. Chris was at the city council meeting last night and expressed interest in having a stakeholders meeting, and so I feel like that's important. I want to get y'all's opinion on that, and then if we think that's something we'd like to do, we ask Michael and city staff to try to facilitate that and put that together for us.
John, I would say that we're also very interested in that. Obviously, that was a directive from the council, so we'll follow through. I think everybody's on board with that. I think the real question is when, where, and what do we present? I think would be important for us to discuss.
To try to keep our schedule, and I know the schedule's not, firm, max in stone or anything like that, but so we don't drag this thing out, I would sure like to do it. We're at the end of April, middle of April, tomorrow, so towards give people plenty of notice. Is this something we can do in person, or do we need to make it a visual? What's the city's policy on that, Michael? Michael, you're on mute.
Sorry, John.
That's okay.
I think if it's, for this group, if that sort of meeting is important to have on a one-to-one, face-to-face, I think we can probably find a location like the PAL gym that gives us plenty of spacing opportunities. It might be better, to be honest with you, because you guys can see the reactions. You can be able to clearly explain and articulate what it is we're trying to do with the impact fee. And I think it gives you the platform to then get their feedback in a way that allows for a lot of interaction, if you will.
Chris, is that kind of what you think also? And is this what you've done in other scenarios?
Yeah, most of our conversation was pre-COVID, so we were all nice and tight. But yeah, anytime we can get face-to-face and read nonverbal, and I'm a big proponent of that, and obviously keeping safety at the forefront, but I always like to get in front of everybody so you can have good discussion and read people.
Hey, Chris, how much of the numbers were disclosed in your various meetings that y'all had?
Jeff can kind of hop in Lubbock. We got pretty detailed. I mean, we dug into the formula. We looked at some of the right-of-way conversation. We looked at how they got all the traffic numbers. I mean, it was pretty intense, wasn't it, Jeff?
Yeah, we broke it down pretty heavily in that city.
Well,
so
the type of stuff that you presented today, I think it would be very important. I think showing how you got, from not one of those guys has probably studied the master plan. Chris is probably the only one, and maybe one or two other guys I could think of. But as far as looking at the city's master plan, looking at the capital needs, I think helping the stakeholders understand that, they probably understand that for their specific tract of land. I bet you Joe Hertz looked at what y'all are saying needs to happen in the northeast quarter of town, but there are not many people that do that. So I think giving them a real good understanding of how we got to this $350 million in 10 years is important, because that provides them the platform for what they do for a living. And then go into these comparisons and talk about Midland, Texas, because I think that's very relevant, right, Chris? I mean, that's going to impact how, I mean, you said it would impact how you do things here versus Midland.
I mean, when we personally, and I'm just speaking on behalf of Beatonbow for a minute, when we raise our homes $1,000, we price a lot of people out just from that $1,000. So with lumber going on, we tried to absorb that. Talking about impact fees, we're trying to prepare where we can for that. And I mean, that's just part of our industry. Everything goes up all the time. So we're trying to figure out how to keep it minimal. One thing that I think if there's any other developers that we're reaching out to, or even some of the commercial guys, I wasn't able to grab any of the slides. I don't know if those are centrally located anywhere, but specifically the CIP plan and the master plan, if there's somebody that can send those out to that group before the meeting, so they get a little time to study that with it, I think would be very helpful.
I think what we have is public information, because we're a notice meeting. So I think we can certainly do that.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah,
Vanessa?
Yes, John, you're correct. We can send that information out with the invitation for the developers.
Okay. Can we, Michael, and look towards the, early May, sometime in May, in a couple of weeks or so? Try to
John, I was thinking a couple of weeks myself. So yes, sir, we can certainly make that happen. If we want to target the first week in May, Tuesdays obviously are bad for city staff just because we're tied up with so much council stuff. But
Sure.
I think Monday's available, Thursday. There's Wednesday, it's May 5th. So there, if you guys want to look at that first week in May, we can certainly target that, or if the second week works better, we can target that as well. What I don't know, Jeff, you can jump in here, in terms of the schedule that we had laid out, where does that put us?
I think if I remember correctly, I'm pulling up the schedule from last night. We had talked about going to council, because if you recall, for the committee to set the public hearing, you have to advertise for 30 days. We had talked about going to council on April 27th to set the public hearing for June 8th, I believe, but I'm verifying that.
Okay.
And so our thought was we had April and May to do that. So if we met with the stakeholders early May, then had a follow-up meeting with CIC, a week or so later, that still gives us good time to get a recommendation formed.
Yeah. So John, that would put the first and second week of May doable for that meeting with the developers and stakeholders.
I would personally, make the Wednesday at 5 o'clock or 5:30 on Wednesday, May the 5th, or Monday, May the 10th. Tuesdays are usually out, or Thursday, May the 13th.
May 5th, we have a TERS meeting
Oh, that's right.
at 3 p.m. council chambers.
Yeah, you're right, Richard.
Okay.
If we do it at 5 that day, just make me a double meeting.
Monday, May 10th, does that fit everybody's schedule?
I'm good.
Kimley Horn, you certainly would be integral to this presentation and discussion.
Yeah, if I'm seeing another city CIC work session on the.
John,
Lena, I'm on the meeting.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think John Atkins and I have a conflict that night, but we might be able to up somehow. I don't know, John, what you think about that? I may not be able to have both of us there.
Yeah, it's kind of we have the client that we're talking about, it's in the Metroplex here, and it's unique. I think.
Okay, let's
need to Jeff and I serving them it'd be the third update for them that we've done, and it's been me and Jeff.
Mr. Landgraf, is there a problem with the 6th of May? I noticed you didn't mention that as a possible date.
There is for me personally. I don't have to be there, but I have a commitment with some in-laws that day.
Yes, sir. I understand. Thank you.
What was the back-to-back on the 5th?
We're meeting tax reassessment zone meeting 3 o'clock at city chambers at 3, and we've never had one last more than an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Richard, would that hurt your feelings if we did it at 5:30 on the 5th?
No, wouldn't hurt my feelings, and we could. What's wrong with using the city chambers?
Richard, it might be depending on what the crowd size might be. I want to make sure we're able to accommodate everybody and keep everybody distance. I would think, Mr. Landgraf, that we might get a good crowd. So we definitely want to make sure we have enough space.
Okay, where's that place you said? Where'd you say?
It's the old Floyd Gwynn gym, Richard.
Oh, I can make
West County.
I can make it.
It's pretty open space.
Jeff, can you make the 5th?
Yes.
Okay, so can I. I'm going to go ahead and block that out. It looks like we're heading that
way. And Mr. Landgraf, we'll verify that location. I just was reminded that we started construction over at Floyd Gwynn Park. Now, it doesn't impact the gym. We just need to make sure we have good access to the gym.
John, I think you may have gone on mute again accidentally.
Yeah, I don't think that parking lot at the gym has been disrupted yet. But
Yeah, I didn't think so either, John, but we'll certainly double check that.
Okay. Let's set for 5:30. Michael, I would like to make sure that we get all of the pertinent backup information sent out. I think that was a great idea, Chris, that we do that, so that it gives the stakeholder community some idea of what we're want to discuss. And I think having them understand, $350 million in 10 years is a lot of money, no matter how you say it. And we just need to be able to have this community grow. I want to ask this question. Does the Attorney General's ruling have anything to do with what we're doing, Michael? You and I have had discussions around the edges about that.
Yes, sir, and that's not necessarily specifically on this agenda, but I will tell you that we did discuss some potential ways forward with the council last night. So I would not anticipate changing how we are proceeding with this process, because it's my intent that this community can continue to grow.
Okay, I mean, mine too, but I didn't know if we need to pause ourselves until there might be some further resolution to some of that, or if we just need to keep going. So I'll defer to your suggestion on that.
Yes,
Hey, John, and just as a reminder, this is a plan that we can bring back if for some reason any of the projects on the current CIP need to be pulled off for any reason. We would bring that back to you guys to reassess any impact fees if needed.
Okay, fair enough. I understand that.
John, can I ask a question of John and Chris, or John and Jeff?
Well,
if we come up with a figure for the residential, let's just make up a number that we don't go by your deal exactly, but we come up with a number like, 3,000 for one group, 2,000 for the next group, 3,000 for the next group on residential. We're in three different districts. How does that affect? How can we turn that around into the development side? In other words, for a 5,000 square foot building or a 200 million square foot building, how would we do that?
So we would, if you told us like, hey, this is what we want for a single family home, we'll divide that back to the vehicle mile cost and then show you how that translates to those buildings at that exact cost.
Okay, good.
You can make that decision if like that's what you want to use for non-residential. So if you give us that as, hey, this is what we want to look for single family, we can convert that back to non-single family.
Okay, good. Because I was hoping you could do it, because I damn sure couldn't.
Yeah, no, we'll do the work for you.
And we wouldn't necessarily have to apply that. I mean, we could still set commercial multifamily at something different anyway, right? I mean,
yes.
we still have that flexibility, so we could look at that. Okay.
Yeah, the
Right.
conversations 5 years ago was the discount wasn't on residential, it was on non-residential, but with the affordable housing talk over the last few years, the conversation has flipped. So kind of depends on what the market is, what the conversation goes to.
Okay. Chris, are you good with what we're talking about? You think the development community will respond and be present?
I sure hope so.
Okay.
I think one of the things I talked about the mayor about was trying to get this public and give everybody opportunity. So if somebody comes in and says, I didn't know about it, and y'all done your due diligence and made it public, there's not much empathy there. So I think moving forward, trying to get stakeholders involved, you're headed down that path, giving everybody the opportunity to kind of chime in, so they can't really sit back and say, well, I didn't know about it, or it's too high and whatever.
Okay. Well, and I think we had a comment from one Mr. Marrero had comment from one developer saying he needed more time to respond. So I think by setting this, May 5th, that should give everybody plenty of time. If we can get the, attachments sent to them with an invitation, I'm ready to do that. And I'll entertain a motion that we have a stakeholders meeting at 5:30 PM on May the 5th at a site to be determined by city staff for availability for a large crowd.
So moved.
Joe Hurt, so moved. A second.
I second.
Richard seconded. Any other discussion, comments?
John, this is Michael again. I just want to make sure in terms of presentation material, just to recap, we want to, again, to give a good short overview of why we're here, and then have Jeff essentially present the information we discussed today. Is that right? When it comes to the actual numbers. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, I think that's the important thing. Right. Everybody agree with that? That's what we're
Yes.
trying to accomplish. Okay. Yes, sir. All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Let me look at my agenda. What else did we have to just talk about today? I think that gets us where we need to be. Any other comments, questions, or discussion from the CIAC?
Hey, John, I just have a clarification. Well, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. These are just recommendations that we're going to do to the city council. The city council is still going to have the, I guess, ultimate authority to change at that city council meeting, whatever we're recommending. Right?
Absolutely, Philly. That's the
Okay.
way I understand it too. And
Okay.
I don't know that we, like Jeff talked about, we're not obligated to give them a hard recommendation of, $2,137 or any number. But typically that's what is done, is we fill in that chart with our recommendations and whatever footnotes we want to put on there, that we want to discount for single family housing. We want affordable housing to have a further discount, or this area to have a different.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, I think that's what ultimately, after we get this feedback from the stakeholders, then I think that'll be our next task, is to look where we want to go and what we
Perfect.
want to recommend.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Okay. I'm good. Thank you, guys. If
Hey,
nothing
John,
else. Yeah.
one
Oh,
quick
yes.
comment. I know that
please.
we had the last meeting scheduled tentatively when we gave you guys a schedule for it to be this month, but seeing as how we're having a stakeholder meeting on May 5th, is it safe to assume that the CIAC will continue to meet on the second Wednesday of next month to formulate these written recommendations based on the stakeholder meeting?
Vanessa, I think that's absolutely what we would do. So that would be a week after, on May the 12th, we would have this meeting at 3 PM. And then that's where we would start doing the serious work after the stakeholder meeting.
Yep.
Okay, sounds
John,
good.
John, could I ask if we could move that to the 19th?
We can, as far as I'm concerned.
Does anybody else have a problem with the 19th? Vanessa, do you have a problem with the 19th?
No, I think that the 19th works for us if that's what suits the CIAC best.
I'm open.
Well, I
I'm
think
open
that'll
that day,
give us a
so-
little more time to digest what happens on the 5th.
That
Jeff.
works.
Jeff Whitaker, can you handle, I've got another CIEC meeting in another community on the 19th. Jeff, could you handle it without me, which you're pretty much doing right now anyway?
I'm 99% sure I can.
Pencil us in, Jeff, for 3 o'clock on the 19th.
I'm penciling you in. I had a vacation plan that day, but I'm 99% sure it's moving to the 12th. So I think you lucked out.
If it's virtual, I can still do it.
We can probably have that meeting virtually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly no need for you to come here. Probably need you physically here on the 5th, though.
Sure.
Yeah. If it's
Yeah.
virtual, I can attend both meetings I've got that day. So,
John, I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, we can-
Whatever you need to do, but and we can discuss later, maybe that night, we can decide whether we want to have our meeting virtually or us meet. These seem to be working. I don't like them, but they seem to be working fairly well. I'll let the committee decide.
It works for me.
Any other comments or questions, concerns? Chris, appreciate your participation. Very helpful, good information, and we look forward to seeing you on the 5th.
Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for involving me. I sure appreciate being here.
Great. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. We'll stand adjourned and see you on the 5th. And anybody's got any comments, call or email me. I'm available.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
thank you. See y'all.